little bit and trying to figure out what are we doing, who are we, and really also trying to see if it's possible to publish the work outside of the prison. And in those conversations, folks would say over and over again, we want to be known for more than the crimes that we've committed. We want to be known for more than what landed us here, which is what has been in the news, right? And so really folks wanted to be able to tell their story. And so that's what a lot of the focus of what we have is, how do they tell their story, and for multiple audiences, and to let people on the outside know that they have family and they have hopes and they have dreams, and like all of us also have regrets, and are also constantly trying to work on healing. And so that's really the project. We meet once a week, so every Monday from 1 to 3. And we kind of run it, and this is a product of me being an instructor at within the UH system. We run it on kind of the semester. We have a fall and spring semester and then a summer session. And people can repeat the class, so it's actually for no credit. But I will say it does, I think, assist folks with being a little bit more confident in their ability to both write and to express themselves, so that, on a very practical way, that they're a little bit more prepared for English 100 through Windward Community College. And several of the people in the class have also been encouraged to take their GED, and just a number of people have just passed their GED, and so they were all excited about that last week when we met.
Let me just say this though, this is a classy publication. And I know that a lot of work went into doing this, but in terms of how the work impacts the women, would you consider this kind of program to be part of rehabilitation?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things that the women have said, and the reason why they wanted to publish their stories, that they didn't want to just keep them for themselves, is because that they see telling their stories as a part of healing and rehabilitation. It's something about accountability, but it's also something about, many people have been survivors of abuse, many, and particularly domestic violence. And so some of this is about claiming their stories, and also being able to pivot as well. And I should give a special shout out to UH students though too, because there's not internet and computer access to be able to publish or to produce these in the prison. What we do is we take the handwritten material. I have students who work with me in sociology classes, and they get to work and produce an amazing product.
That's why it's so slick. I mean, it's really looking good. So let's shift a little bit to Della, because the idea of rehabilitation is kind of like high in everybody's mind, because prison may not be the best place for rehabilitation. So there's got to be a way made so that can happen before they come out. What's your thinking?
So what's my thinking? When I look at a program like this, and when I had the opportunity to go and sit in on a class and listen to the stories that were being told, and the journaling that was going on, you could see the healing in action. And so, some folks would be like, "Oh, this is just talk therapy." But what's so important about this? But I think that action of writing and thinking and then putting it down and then having it published for the world makes it real, and it starts to hold people accountable. And so there's many things that are happening with programs like this that lead and prepare people to be able to go outside, to rejoin the community. But this is just one piece of it, right? This is only a writing piece, but there's so much more that also has to happen in prisons to prepare people to be ready for when they come out. And at the end of the day, quite frankly, for policymakers like me, it's far more expensive to incarcerate people. And it's not healthy for communities. So it's programs like this that we need to see more of, so that we can prepare people and rehabilitate people for reentry.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of community, because I'm going to ask you, who's the target audience? where were they meant to go?
So we talk about that quite a bit actually in the project, because who's the audience, right? Who are we writing for? Because then that also, as any writer will tell you, shapes how you create your piece, right? And so it can be tough though, because there's multiple audiences, right? So sometimes people literally want to almost dedicate something to their grandkids, right? We have one person who's constantly writing about her grandkids because she wants them to know that she is doing everything that she can for them and to rejoin them. But really, when we talk about where should this go, the very first thing that people say is public libraries, right? We want anybody to be able to pick up the newsletter. More recently, the conversation that Della came in and had, that's one of the things too that they realized through writing their stories is, oh, maybe we can actually talk with decision makers about our conditions and what we hope for, what public safety means to us as well as to the rest of our communities, because public safety is just as important for them as any of us. So I think that the newsletter is for anybody.
So back to the idea of being the chair of the House Committee on Public Safety, what does that mean? I mean, what is public safety? Tell us about public safety. Tell us about whether or not the community has anything at all to do with public safety. Because, this target is the community. And which means that, and I think you brought up the idea of community as well. Where does community fit?
So I think public safety can be a very loaded term. It can be very loaded, like people think about crime and being assaulted and being afraid of the criminals, right?
And punishment.
And punishment. And that is a part of the public safety system. But I think if we want to really address and tackle the problems of public safety and actually make our community safe, yes, we're going to need a system that's going to have to incarcerate and, dole out justice. So that system also has to accommodate re-entry of folks. Because again, we cannot simply just hold people forever. And I think so, for me, public safety is also a system where we know the people who are inside have families on the outside. They have communities on the outside. And when they get released back into the community, we have to create situations where they will be able to thrive. We know that if we throw people out, you talk about meeting some people out on the street and learning for the first time that they've just come out of prison. If we just throw them out there without any support system, we know what the chances are of them coming back. Very high.
So just briefly, because I'm speaking here as a representative of White Advocacy Council, we have major concerns on the west side about the fact that there are so many homeless and houseless people. And we know that if the women that are coming out have no place to go, they're gonna end up on the beach, and because we met them. We're trying to figure out on our side if government is unable to meet the needs. What you're inviting is like recidivism, right? All these guys that are out are gonna come back in, and then so then you need a new prison. You gotta build bigger because you're gonna have more people, because there is no intent to actually have them succeed when they're in a community, because there's nobody to receive them. I'm gonna push all the time on the idea of community. What exactly could be the role of community in public safety?
You know what? I love that you asked that, and I love that you asked who is this for. So I'm even wondering if there are places, nonprofits, churches, people who are willing to work with people who are coming out of prison to be part of the discharge planning, be part of the housing supports that they're gonna be going out into, so that they're just not released to the street. Like, we often talk about discharge planning for hospitals. There should be discharge planning for prisons. And so, we've done a lot of work at the legislature to say, okay, you should have your medical insurance. If you're gonna qualify for Medicaid, a upon leaving, then we should be starting to do that now while you're in prison. And so we have some efforts that get underway, but I think maybe what might be missing and what community can do, and maybe this is a conversation we have to have with the director. How do we open up the system and the discharge planning process to invite community in? Because if community has the capacity to welcome people, you know, then maybe we have this warm handoff, right? And it's not just you finding people on the beach. It's actually, oh, you know, Auntie's gonna come out. You know she's coming out on Saturday. Do we have a place where she can go? Do we have a temporary bed where she can go? You know, I think asking those questions and preparing.
I love it. I think, why are we not prepared to do this? This stuff is not new. It's not talked about at all. And I'm thinking that the community would make stronger efforts if we knew that there was support coming from, for example, correctional, public safety, but also the prison system itself. What am I trying to say?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things, and this is where, and we've had lots of conversations about, there's a range of things that need to happen, but it's not only on re-entry, it's also pre, right? And so a lot of the folks have said, shared stories about how if I just would have had someone to, you know, kind of preempt or been able to have housing in the first place, so I didn't have to rely upon my abusive boyfriend, who then I got involved in drug trafficking or whatever, right? If there are basically diversion, right? So that we have, but those things need to be supported and funded, quite frankly, in an appropriate way, right? We live in a state where cost of housing is extremely high, where we have, you know, that we compete with New York and DC for the highest unhoused, you know, rate. And so how do we provide services so that folks don't even enter into the criminal justice system? But then, as it does, right, in any community, there's going to be harm, right? So when people do end up, then how do we, 95% of those people will come back out and be our neighbors. And so how do we, but I think that a lot of that is, how do we build a community? How do we re-envision community in ways that are doing what I see actually in the class? I always tell the folks on the inside, I have seen the most care and compassion of anywhere, because they provide it to one another. I'm not talking about how they get treated by, you know, the correctional officers or whatever, but what they give to one another is amazing. And how do we build bigger supports for that?
Della, does the House Committee on Public Safety have these kinds of discussions?
We do have some of these discussions. We are always looking for ways to fund programs. You know, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations, it was just rebranded that like less than 5 years ago. So there's been a lot of conversations, but I think the stage we're in now is that we actually have to demand and require these programs and make sure these programs are being delivered by the institution, by the department. And you know, it's challenging in these times. We have workforce shortages, we don't have enough treatment beds outside in community. But you know, I think the governor with his initiatives with the Kahale, and maybe we could talk a lot about that.
We could, but not today.
Not today, not today. But I mean, that's the thing, right? I feel like in government, we actually put a lot of resources and money towards this, and governor has a team of people who are supposed to be doing this, and so like, I just wanna ask them, like, deliver. You know, we've given you the policy tools, we've given you the funding, now it's time for you to deliver, and maybe part of that delivery is actually bringing in community more so that we can have places where people are received in a better fashion.
So I can tell where the difference in thinking is. I don't think that the state or the Department of Public Safety or whatever it's called now can actually bring people in. That's backwards. What I'm saying is community has its own strengths and its driven by whatever drives communities to do the work. And I think for us, like at White Eye Local Superintendent Council, we have thoughts and ideas and ways to solve problems which are not always welcomed by the state, maybe because they didn't think about it. But it's like having a standing army. The whole community is looking for a place to fit because we have the wherewithal and the desire to do these things without becoming like an official program. And I'm just raising that because there's a lot of frustration out there because we see what's happening. And we don't really know how to address any of that because people are not listening. I don't know. What's your sense of whether or not people are paying attention?
Can I respectfully push just a
Yeah,
little bit?
absolutely.
So, I think part of it is what level is the legislature providing support? So, from my understanding, like 4 million went into like supportive services, but like 20 or 25 million went into planning of OCCC, right? And so when we take a look at the huge discrepancy, or we have like proposed $1 billion jail, but we have like drops in the bucket compared, and 4 million for sure is no like, you know, like just pennies, but it is in comparison. I mean, $1 billion jail is quite frankly more than the new Trump, you know, East Wing. So I'm just wondering when we think about like level of support, like how do we ramp that up?
I think there's always ways to increase monies and support appropriations to community. But I think what's missing in that analysis, and if I can push back a little bit, is that we have provided so much money to the governor's kohala, to supportive services that are supposed to be creating these communities, right? And we've been promised a community where they're taking in formerly incarcerated people. And so when you start to add up those monies, that's added to the $4 million. And I guess my question then is what is the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation? What is the Department of Health, which is Adult Mental Health Division that has oversight over substance abuse and treatment programs? What are they doing to coordinate all of the millions of dollars we've given to them to be able to create places in community? And I think, you know, we actually have the same frustration as like you're frustrated because like you don't see government really doing anything. We're frustrated because we keep giving governor so much money, and where is the deliverable? And so I guess maybe a call to action could be for us to be like, let's bring the department chairs to the table and say, okay, so how are you delivering for community? We have a community here on the Waianae Coast that's hurting. We also have faith groups, Waianae, Kapuna Council that's standing by ready to help. Why don't we have more programs? Why don't we have more community-based programs? Let's ask those questions.
Us, you know, so that would, you know, I think that if our legislators on West Side were more responsive, they would be having these discussions and hopefully reaching out to community, but I don't see it. And so like, it seems really hard work. And so, you know, our strategy is, if I can't talk to these guys who are supposed to represent us, we're gonna go above them. Who else can we talk to? If we can't have a discussion, for example, with the person who's overseeing the prison system, who can we have a discussion with? That's why you're at this table. We wanna have a discussion with you so you can provide us with a process where we can actually now talk to the people that are in charge and let them know how discouraged we get to be because we're unable to help and we think we can help. And you're free. Right. Maybe that's the part that's problematic is that we're free. Because when we volunteer, you don't necessarily have oversight over us.
Well, I would like to see the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation strengthen the programs. Immediately just strengthen the programs that are existing there, like Colleen's program. But if there's more opportunities, if we can have a writing program in the men's group, I think that's a great place. That's a next great place to start.
And I think that that might be in the works, because we already have been corresponding with others who do similar kinds of work. If this work is successful, which it seems to be, because there's so much participation, I don't know if you have a waiting list of people who may wanna come in, so not enough room, but the output is humongous. group can be engaged, so can that one. And then the cost is like 0, because communities have a tendency to raise their own funds, so it's not ever saying, we need money from you, state, or you, city, to do this, or this. Whether you give it or not, we're gonna get it done because communities can mobilize its own resources. So I think what I'm seeing is there's a big separation now, and your presence here is really to kind of remind people it doesn't have to be. You gotta help us.
I'm ready to help. I'm ready to keep having the conversations and pushing. I know that the department has gone through some staff changes, so I'm hoping they're more oriented to making sure that community can participate in the programs, and then help build out a reentry system that actually, fits with community.
I'm looking forward to that. But it's a kind of good word that you can take that when you're having the next class.
Yeah, well, and I was curious because and I wanted to publicly give a thank you to you for coming to join the class. I think it was at the end of September, and the folks in the class, they were really thankful, and they said, I know that she promised, or she didn't say that she could promise to do, deliver certain things, but they said we really felt like she listened and she heard us. And so I'm just curious, like, what are some of the things that you took away from that conversation?
First of all, I was very appreciative of the honesty from the folks there. I was disappointed to hear that they felt that they didn't have discharge planning. I was very disappointed to hear that because, like, on one hand, I hear constantly from officials, oh no, discharge planning begins the moment that they come into the system. Well, I didn't hear that from those individuals. And I think, there's oftentimes changes in staffing and all those kind of things, but we need to do better. And so what I would like to see is that the rhetoric and the promises and the pledges that we say that discharge planning begins at the moment that someone's brought into the system, we need to deliver on that. And so I would take that message back and be like, what is the planning process? So I can ask those questions in a
Right.
formal hearing.
I kind of like that because, part of the discharge planning might be networking with the communities that can help on the receiving end.
Yes.
Right, because you're talking about this is what you need and you need to go out and get it as it like good. And on our end, we can say, hey, you know what you need, so maybe we can supply this and this, but not that. And find somebody else who can do it.
Let me, and one other very specific, just ask was, there was complaints about not having access to notary. And I was thinking to myself, that should be almost automatic. Because, even when you're in prison and trying to come out, you're gonna have to be taking care of paperwork. These are women who have children, and so they need access to these notaries, who I understand are free. But I think that's something that, even that little problem, let's address it.
So we're gonna wrap up right now because we're running out of time. I wanna thank you both for being here today. And then I also wanna let people know, and especially you guys out there, this deserves more discussion. And I think what we're gonna do is try to increase the amount of time we can spend talking about what's going on and asking for community support. And thank you so much, both of you. Thank you from Wine and also Kupuna Council and thank you to Auntie Z, by the way, whose time we're using up right now, for making space for us to have this discussion, because obviously it's super important. Yes. We have 10 seconds. Do you want to say anything quick?
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and then Liberty. Liberty is a good idea, folks. And then we'll make it available.